In the late 90s to early 2000s, one thing would come along that would totally change video gaming forever. And that thing is parkour. Parkour! Birthed from the imaginations of street kids from Lease, parkour would go on to be the basis for many multi-million-dollar gaming franchises. So, in today's video, we will explore how parkour changed video gaming. Throughout the 2000s, parkour spread all the way across Europe after a number of iconic TV shows, documentaries, and films. These would inspire the first wave of freerunners, or as they would rather be called, traceurs. These were like the true OGs of parkour. They'd wear weird camo trousers, strange hats, and they would thrive off of getting weird looks from passers-by. As soon as the wider world caught wind of parkour, you would see it everywhere. Films would always have a parkour chase scene. Nearly every advert would just slap a freerunner in it to make their product look cooler than it really is. And finally, but most important to our story, parkour would start to appear in video games. But before we get into it, this video would not be possible without today's sponsor, NordVPN. One of the first things that got me into parkour was the sense of freedom you get when you do it. And it's never quite sat well with me that every time you use the internet, you can be tracked and traced. NordVPN encrypts all of your internet data, making it impossible for anyone to see your private information. It's scarily easy for hackers to get a hold of this information, especially if you use things like public Wi-Fi's. The best part is that NordVPN is available on both your PC and your mobile, making sure that all your personal data and private information is kept private. If you're anything like me, those are the things that are most important with this VPN. However, on top of all that, you can get access to loads of content that's on Netflix, available only in different countries. If you head over to nordvpn.com right now and enter my code JimmyVPN, you'll get 1 month totally free and 68% off your subscription. Not only does it massively help me out when you use my affiliate code, but you'll be able to use the web freely and safely for less than the price of a coffee every month. Anyway, back to the video. Before we'd see parkour become commonplace in video games, it would take one company to be the first to do it. And that company is Ubisoft, who are nowadays the kings of absolutely rinsing a series to death. But believe it or not, at one point, Ubisoft actually made quite original games. Famously, Ubisoft are known for developing a little-known game called Assassin's Creed. However, before we get too into that, we need to take a step back.
Oh, yes.
Oh!
Oh! Yes, that's the one.
That's as good a sign as any to stop doing that jump. One of the very first major implementations of parkour in video games would come out in 2002 in Ubisoft's hit, Prince of Persia, Sands of Time. The Prince of Persia series had been experimenting with parkour-like movements ever since its first game in 1989. However, at the time, parkour didn't exist. It wasn't until 1998 that we would see the very first parkour video called SpeedAir Man. So in 1989, there was little chance that the developers of the first Prince of Persia would have known what parkour was. Look, you could argue that video game developers had been using parkour since before parkour was even a thing. And you'd be right. Parkour-like movements have always existed in fast-paced action games. However, before parkour became an actual sport, these developers didn't know how parkour should look and feel in a video game. They were kind of just making it up as they were going along.
Good.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Oh. Yes.
Video games exist within the universe that we know and understand. Like, sure, the developers will bend the rules a little bit, maybe you could jump a bit higher, or maybe you could shoot a portal into a wall. However, these are just artistic impressions on what those things would look like within our universe. So these game developers didn't really have any reference material on how parkour should look. Even in the very first Prince of Persia, they had to base the movement on what they thought parkour looked like through a technique called rotoscoping. The animator literally just filmed their son going out and jumping and climbing and doing things like that. They would then take that footage and put it into the software and trace the image around it. In 2003, Ubisoft would release Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. This game was set to be groundbreaking, with its main selling point being its seamless movement and combat controls. So the animators of this game would look to people like Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, and most importantly, David Bell. You have to bear in mind that the internet back then was super slow and it was nothing like what it is today. Like, YouTube didn't even exist at that point. So these animators would have been searching endlessly trying to find the very few parkour videos that existed online. With its wall running and enjoyable parkour mechanics, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time was a major hit. However, something wasn't quite right. Parkour in Prince of Persia was an overstretch of the imagination. It was fun, it was enjoyable to play, but it didn't feel real. But then parkour would come along and totally revolutionize gaming. Parkour would show game developers exactly how these movements should look in real life. As parkour grew, freerunners from all around the world would take to filming them do parkour, making videos, and posting them online. Unwittingly, this was arming game developers with an endless arsenal of reference material for them to base their animations on. Just 2 years after Sands of Time, we would see parkour make a guest appearance in the cult classic Tony Hawk's American Wasteland. Introduced to us by the most stereotypical Frenchman on earth.
Bonjour. In France, we don't need boards with wheels to do tricks. We do the parkour.
What seemed to be a gimmick actually turned out to be a pretty useful navigation tool within the game. Parkour in Tony Hawk's would allow you to get to hard to reach areas that otherwise you probably wouldn't have been able to get to. Can we just take 1 minute to appreciate this War Arabian 360 arm jump? I've never seen anyone do that in my life. 1 year later, in 2006, parkour would appear in a super underrated game. This game is called, and I'll have to check my phone because I can never remember it, Marc Ecko's Getting Up: Contents Under Pressure. The game followed a graffiti artist rebelling from an Orwellian government. Honestly, I'd never even heard of this game until I randomly stumbled across this interview of my friend saying that this is the game that got him into parkour. Something I found really cool when watching videos on it was the ability to like shimmy across ledges. It looked really realistic, and I've done that sort of movement myself, so it was quite impressive to see that in a game. As well, you had the ability to do drop descents, which didn't really become a thing until the mid-2010s. So it was pretty forward thinking of these game developers all the way back in 2006. In 2007, we would receive the most underwhelming parkour video game ever made.
Practice the art of free running, or parkour. It is the art of fluid motion through an urban environment. Those who practice parkour are known as tracers.
This game came from Rebellion Developments, and it was simply titled Freerunning. The game was rushed and met with pretty mixed reviews. Eurogamer criticised it for its lack of narrative and objective, as well as its stiff and clunky controls, which is pretty counterproductive for a game literally titled Freerunning. It's honestly such a shame that this game sucked, because this could have been parkour's answer to Tony Hawk's. It was developed with the biggest parkour team at the time called Urban Free Flow, and the whole community kind of assumed this was going to be major for parkour, but the game totally flopped. That training session completely killed my legs. Later on in that same year, 2006, a game would come along that would totally change everything. And that game is Assassin's Creed. The parkour mechanics were seamless. They had this weight to them. They felt real. They were exactly how parkour should feel like in a game. Assassin's Creed was originally intended to be a Prince of Persia sequel. However, the developers, whilst they were making it, realised that this game had something to it, and it warranted being its own complete game. So whilst Prince of Persia took off in its own direction, becoming a bit more fantastical and the parkour was simplified, Assassin's Creed honed in on the parkour. They wanted it to feel realistic. They wanted it to be so believable that it made you immerse more into the game. Assassin's Creed got parkour right. Skirting between fantasy and reality, far-fetched enough for it to be fun, but realistic enough for it to be immersive. Somehow I was lucky enough to get a hold of Alex Drowin. He was the animation director on Assassin's Creed.
Well, my name is Alex Drouin. And I was the original animation art director on Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, and Assassin's Creed. Back then, you had Lara Croft, because Lara Croft was kind of the movement. They were broken. They were not really fluid one into another. They were great back then, but we were trying to push the fluidity, and we were trying to make it more realistic also. It was really about pushing the limit of fluidity of a character inside a video game, but it was really the will to make it better than ever. We wanted to make the best video game ever, every time. We wanted to have like a character that could walk on, run on the wall and jump. So our first influence, they were more around Jackie Chan and Jet Li. I mean, Jackie Chan, he's a kung fu guy moving around. Well, David Bell is just a guy moving around.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was spectacular. He would make like jump really high, and it was great. He's the one that we inspired, that we could find footage. It was David Bell. It was the early days of motion capture, so we would put ourselves the suit and make our own moves, and then we are animators, so we just modified the move to make it fit. There's a lot of work made by hand, just pure animation.
Did you hire free runners, or did you?
No, not at all, man. We couldn't find any parkour guy back in the days.
I know.
and all the jump, they were made by hand. They were not like motion capture. It's really what we wanted to have, a person moving around the environment with a nice flow, which is what parkour is about.
Assassin's Creed was a major hit. It sold 10 million units across all platforms and just became an absolute classic. The game gave people the freedom to explore the Holy Land in 1191 AD. I think that's how you're meant to say it. The game gave you this insane feeling of freedom. You could do whatever you want. Everything was interactable. You could jump and climb on pretty much anything. Despite some critics saying that the game didn't have a very good story and it felt a little bit too repetitive, but none of this really mattered. People simply just enjoyed climbing and jumping across the Holy Land. As Assassin's Creed was released, the genre of open world games had become increasingly popular. People love exploring a map without being forced in a certain direction. So taking the open world format and adding parkour gave a whole new level of freedom to explore. And I think it was so perfect that it was Assassin's Creed who did this. Their games are always set in really historic time periods. Being able to do parkour in these long lost towns and cities was just amazing. You would see perspectives that people of the time wouldn't have even seen. In 2009, Assassin's Creed would get its sequel with Assassin's Creed 2. The game used the same movement mechanics that made Assassin's Creed 1 popular. The sequel had addressed most of the criticisms they received in the first game and had truly cemented Assassin's Creed as a game franchise that was here to stay. Just prior to Assassin's Creed 2, in 2008 another monumental game had been released, and that game was called Mirror's Edge. Mirror's Edge approached parkour differently than Assassin's Creed. Instead of being a third-person perspective, you were instead put in the body of the main character, Faith. For parkour in video games, this was totally unique. No one had done this before. The game worked as a kind of puzzle solver / beat your personal best type of game, and I really loved this game. Mirror's Edge has really become a cult classic, with not just the incredible parkour, but with the stunning visuals and the iconic theme song. Sadly, both Mirror's Edge 1 and its long-awaited sequel Catalyst both underperformed in sales and kind of were seen as a flop. However, the impact that Mirror's Edge had on the gaming world was incredibly important. Assassin's Creed and Mirror's Edge have become the blueprint of how parkour should be used in video games. And we can split that into first and third person parkour. In the first person category, we have games such as Thief, which came out in 2014. Dying Light, which came out in 2015 and has an expected sequel to come out for next generation consoles. And even niche games such as Downward in 2017 and the now very popular Hot Lava in 2018. All of these games expanded the first-person parkour genre. And then in the third person category, we have 2 games in 2009, which both featured non-realistic, fantastical parkour, with Infamous and Prototype, which had its sequel in 2012. As well, in 2012, Sleeping Dogs was released with rather smooth parkour mechanics. And then in 2014, we had Watch Dogs, which got a sequel in 2016. Watch Dogs 2 was really interesting because it added flips and acrobatics that usually you won't see in a video game. Despite sometimes looking a little bit awkward when connecting the movements, it was still really cool to see. And in 2017, a Lord of the Rings game was released called Middle-earth: Shadow of War, which was effectively an Assassin's Creed ripoff. And in general, we would see more and more games subtly adopt parkour mechanics. You would see this in games like Grand Theft Auto, with the ability to vault, jump, and climb. And you can see parkour used in Far Cry, and even Call of Duty. These seemingly little additions added a level of fluidity and realism to the movement mechanics of games that, prior to parkour, didn't really exist. Despite all these games that feature parkour, one question still remains. And that is, when will we get an actual parkour game? Let me try and explain what I mean by that. Like, skateboarding has obviously Tony Hawk's, it has the Skate series, and even new ones that are being released like Skate XL and Sessions. Even BMX, like I remember religiously playing Dave Mirra's Pro BMX when I was a kid. I love that game, it was a great game. And even now there's a BMX game that I believe is in the works called BMX Street Pipe. If you take the Tony Hawk series as an example, the Tony Hawk's franchise had a massive impact on the real world sport of skateboarding. Endless amounts of kids got into skateboarding because of Tony Hawk's. And other than that failed freerunning game that I mentioned earlier, parkour just hasn't had its Tony Hawk's. Parkour has had a lot of games that feature parkour, but we've never had a real game that is about parkour. Do you ever think that would happen, and do you think that would be a good game?
I definitely think that it would be a good game. I guess it goes with the popularity of the sport. At the end, it's still a business, huh? If you make a game and nobody plays it, it's not really good for you. So my feeling is that the parkour game is going to come from an indie developer, a small studio that is going to do a small things, and it's not going to try to revolutionize the industry and sell zillions of games. It's just going to do his and have a nice game for a niche market.
One exciting thing that has come out recently is True PK FR. Now this is made in Dreams, which is like this game building game that's available on the PS4. I'm yet to actually play this, but it looks really exciting. I follow the guy who makes it, his name's Henry Blue, and he has an Instagram, I think it's @Parkour Game Clips. Well, Alex, you might find interesting, there is a guy who's making a parkour game. He has never made a video game in his life.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, have you heard of Dreams?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so he is making it in Dreams.
Oh yeah, nice.
And it started out as a bit of fun, and he's like really getting into it.
Wake up and I sip my coffee. Only got 3 things on my mind, that's money, house, fun.
It's nice. It's better than I thought. It's cool. It plays a lot with physics. It's really interesting. I like the feel of it. I really like the feel. This is all inside Dreams. Yeah. That's crazy. The challenge when you make a video game is really to get the intention of the player. What does he wants to do? And so when you jump, do you want to jump over the wall? Do you want to put your feet on it? Do you want to put your hands on it? How do you want to interact with it? It's all about that. So unless you have a game that is completely devoted to parkour, you don't have that type of variety of interaction with a wall.
You don't need
it. You don't need it.
I'm really excited to see where Henry takes this project. And it'd be really cool if like a small development company helped him out and worked with him and made something really proper. However, he has got a very big challenge ahead of him. You see, one of the challenges about making a game that's just purely about parkour is not only does the game need amazing parkour mechanics, but it also needs an amazing story. If you take the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series as an example, the thing that made Tony Hawk so successful wasn't just the skateboarding. It was the fact that in Tony Hawk's they integrated the skate culture into the game. Like, you could play as famous skateboarders and you could wear skate brands. For people playing the game, you could get really immersed into this whole new world that you might have not had any clue about. It was the stories and the characters that you played in Tony Hawk's that helped make it such a good game.
Man, I just want to skate like the old days. It used to relax me, not stress me out.
That's your deal, man. Skating is whatever you make it. It didn't change. You're the one that changed. Now go skate. You'll remember why you started in the first place.
People might not agree with me on this, but I even felt with Skate, you know, the game by EA, the thing that Skate lacked was the story. The game obviously made up for it with amazing skateboarding mechanics, but the story was a little bit meh. But there's a reason that the skate games can get away with not having that good of a story. And that's because you can't ride a skateboard in every game. But there are many games that you can do parkour in. So if you made a game that had amazing parkour mechanics, there wouldn't really be anything unique about that. Why would you play that over Mirror's Edge or Assassin's Creed? Parkour has been around since the 80s now. It's literally had about 40 years of culture and history. So you take a little bit of that and then add a story of an aspiring kid who wants to become a professional free runner, and you could have an amazing game. I could picture some really crazy missions in this game. You could take the story of when Vauxhall got destroyed. The whole mission would follow the main character as they try and save Vauxhall. If you don't know what Vauxhall was, it was like the most iconic parkour spot. They got to orchestrate this whole plan, sneak around security and police, and then eventually sabotage the destruction of Vauxhall. Inevitably, it ends in a parkour chase scene. But I want to know what you think. What do you think would make an amazing parkour game? What kind of levels, missions, and characters would you want to see? If you have any crazy ideas, drop them in the comments below.
I mean, I would love to make one, but is it too limited? I mean, it's about the kids, and you see it's becoming popular because you're starting to see a gym that you can go and practice your art, because it's cool to make it on the ground and do it in a city, but like I've seen the one you've done, how London they destroy the best spots. I mean, if the city is not for it, the chances are your parents are not going to be crazy about it. If you go to a gym and there's someone there with experience that can show you more secure, you'll have more and more people, and eventually.
And then maybe it'll become a game one day.
Oh, it will. For sure, for sure.
Alex, I won't take any more of your time, but thank you so much for chatting to me. That's been amazing. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you did. If you want to support the channel, you can go and help me on Patreon, or by using my affiliate code on the NordVPN website. Peace.